So it's been 4.5 years, nearly 5 years since I made this decision to go electric in this Peugeot e-208. You roll back the time 4.5 years, it was definitely a minority decision. But things have changed here in Malta quite drastically. Electric vehicles make up now a huge portion of the sales. Statistically around the world, if you look at the sales from last year, 2024, you're looking at nearly 40% of all new car sales here in Malta were fully electric. That of course excludes plug-in hybrids and hybrids. So just full electric making up nearly 40% of the sales, which is of course among the highest in the world, I believe third or fourth from the world over. Now of course that's been mainly pushed, I would say, by two factors. Number one being the incredible government incentives being offered when buying electric vehicles. We spent 3 years where you got a 12,000 euros cashback grant for buying an electric car. Essentially that has now dropped to 9,000, which is the same amount I actually received when I bought my car 4.5 years ago. Of course, this has been a huge driver. The second driver is, I think, the country itself. Malta has this small island, almost like a small city feel. We have very low speeds and an ideal climate which checks all the boxes for electric vehicles. Now what I want to tell you about really in this video is my experience with this car. What are the features I like and don't like after 4.5 years? And things maybe you should look out for if you're considering going electric yourselves. Guys, I'm Luke and welcome to this episode of The Future is Electric. So actually this channel was founded after a few months after I bought this car. And the whole purpose of it, if you're new here, is basically, I wouldn't say I was a car person to start off with, but what became very clear to me is that the traditional car reviewer, in my opinion, hadn't adapted to this new age of mobility. Like for example, I would see a whole 30-minute review and the only information you'd get about the battery pack, the most expensive component, nearly half the cost of a new electric vehicle, was its size, and that was it. And for a buyer, when I was buying this car, that was definitely not enough information for me. I wanted to know this car and its competitors, who has the better battery tech, who has the better EV tech, and that's how this channel was born. So about that EV tech, I think one of the notable things which you can really measure the efficiency of the vehicle. Now of course this car, I owned it in 2021, as my t-shirt says here, but it was released in the market in 2019. So you could say they were designing this car around about 2016 or thereabouts. And what really shows you how much progress has been made in the electric world is the efficiency of the vehicle. So I am a moderate driver. I don't think I over accelerate or drive haphazardly, which means my driving will be very efficient or reasonably efficient. And my long-term average with this car is sitting at around 17 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. This is of course, I think it was good at the time when this car was released, 2019, but it just goes to show in these 7 or so years how much things have changed. Last week on the channel I test drove the BYD Dolphin Surf. That's this newest, smallest car from BYD, and I achieved in my real-world driving test here in Malta an efficiency of under 10 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That is an incredible figure. Just to put that into perspective, this is as if you're driving a petrol car and the miles per gallon drop by half within 7 years. So the car you bought 7 years ago costs you, if it costs you 40 euros, you can drive the same distance now on half. Now of course with electric cars the financial difference not so notable, right? Because a charge here only costs me like 7 euros to full. So But it just goes to show it's a great way to measure the progress that is being made in the world of electric cars. Something I think is going to continue happening for the foreseeable future. So efficiency was good at the time of release, but as we're saying, there's been quite some significant changes and improvements in that aspect. Now, one of the first, I think, what I really like about the Peugeot e-208 is the build quality. Now, I've tested on the channel over 60 EVs. I've been lucky enough to drive and test 60 EVs over the past few years. And for me, the build quality of Peugeot really stands out. I think the materials chosen, while they are hard plastics at some point, and it's not the nice soft touch materials, you then have to put it all into perspective. And now, having lived with it for nearly 5 years, I can tell that the wear and tear of this vehicle has stood the test of time, right? I feel the interior with a nice good scrubbing, it's not dirty, but with a nice good scrubbing, does feel practically new. And I don't think there's anything on the interior of the car which I say has worn out, despite being used for over 5 years in what is sometimes quite harsh, hot summers here in Malta. Another thing which I think has stood the test of time very well is the gauge cluster, their iCockpit system. And I've driven so many Vs, and this is by far still one of my favorite driving clusters. I think the information displayed to the driver, nice and neat, easy to see, and they also have that cool 3D effect, which I guess helps as well with the visual appearance. I am a big fan of the gauge cluster. Not so much of the infotainment system, but then again, that is judging it against the cars coming out today. Scroll back the clock 5 years time, and this was pretty good. Even for a screen size, it was considered pretty big. This is of course before everybody decided to start putting essentially laptop screens in cars. Another thing I don't really like about the Peugeot, and I do give them a bit of fault for this, because despite the car being 4 years old, this is something I would have expected would have been improved over the years, and that is the mobile app. It has become normal now that every new car has an accompanying mobile app, and I'm sorry to say the one from Peugeot, based on the other ones I've tested, is quite poor. You open it up, it's laggy, the graphics feel outdated, the login system feels like it's straight out of the 90s. I mean, you start in the app, then it directs you to the browser, and then it goes back to the app. It's a lot of shenanigans, and that is something that could have been easily updated and improved, and then over these 4.5 years there's been no noticeable changes done in that regard. Another thing which is I think a great feature, but that as well they're missing out on here, is the remote ability to turn on the car's air conditioning system. I love this feature a lot in the hot summer. Before I go to the car and open the door, essentially, you know that feeling, right? When you get in and it is literally a sauna. With EVs and the Peugeot e-208, you can from the app tell it to essentially turn on the air conditioning system, which is great. Here's the problem with the Peugeot system though. It only lets you do this if your battery is over 50% state of charge, which literally makes no sense, because you're essentially restricted to only being able to do this essentially half the time. And I really don't understand why they do this. It's not like turning on the air conditioning system is going to affect the power in the battery so much, and I haven't seen this restriction in other car brands. So why Peugeot are forcing us to only use this feature when the AC is above 50%, when the battery is above 50%, is beyond me. But let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section down below. Another thing worth noting, especially if you're considering, say, a second-hand version of this car from the same era, 2021, is that this car was released before essentially Euro NCAP, which is the European Safety Agency, forced automakers to make the cars essentially beep at you the second you are 1 kilometer over the speed limit. to beep at you the second your eyes are not on the road for more than, I don't know, splits of a second, because this is what I experience in all new cars essentially when I'm testing them out, is that the second you're like going a bit too fast, you have all these beeps and warnings going off, and you can turn them off, yes, but most of the time they will turn themselves back on every single time you restart the car, which makes getting in the car a fun experience of toggling all these rather annoying, let's be honest, features off. So yes, a second-hand 2021 Peugeot does not come with these annoying perks, I guess. Now, in terms of servicing and recalls, etc., I think that's been a very smooth experience. I service the car once a year. I am now, after 4.5 years, have replaced a full set of tires, mainly because the front ones, remember this is front wheel drive, were getting quite a bit worn out, and I decided to just go ahead and get a fresh new set. But besides that, there hasn't been any other expenses besides the labor which have gone into servicing this car so far. There was a recall on the air conditioning system, which was of course covered for free, both under warranty and I guess under a safety feature. Remember that air conditioning system does cool the battery as well, so it is considered a safety feature in some electric vehicles, and that was, as I said, replaced for free. Coincidentally, around a week before I was meant to go in for the recall, my AC compressor did, although the AC was working, it did start making a funny noise, so that was pretty well timed from Peugeot of when I needed to replace it essentially. But besides that, there's been no other issues in regards to servicing. Insurance, let's talk a bit about that, because you often hear that electric cars are so much more expensive to insure compared to petrol cars, and I've done a little bit of research on this. Perhaps it will warrant a video on its own one day actually. Basically, I reached out to my insurer and I asked them to calculate the insurance premium, how much insurance I would pay, were I to had 4.5 years ago drove off in the equivalent petrol model, which, because the e-208 has an equivalent petrol model, is quite an easy calculation to do. Now, the good news here is the insurance company had registered with them somebody who did take out a normal Peugeot 208, so we could directly compare the pricing. And yes, during the first 3 years, the insurance for the electric car was more, because the price, excluding that government grant, was considerably higher compared to the petrol model. However, come year 3, year 4, the difference in the insurance cost became negligible, particularly when then you add on to that the running costs of the vehicle, which are next to none essentially. Range is another one I want to speak about, because you often hear, what's your real world driving range, what's your real world driving range? And let me tell you, after 5 years, nearly 5 years, I've come to the realization, now this is coming from the person who does a real world driving test on every single EV I try on the channel, right? But after 5 years, I've come to the realization that, frankly, I do not care how much range this car gives me. So this car started off with a WLTP range of 340 kilometers. It generally nearly always met that, so I did get the near 340 kilometers here in Malta in the ideal driving conditions, as I explained earlier. But what becomes very clear is that as long as you have your charging situation figured out, and for me, I have the most, to be truthful, convenient method, which is charging at home. So I literally park the car in the garage as I would do with any other car, and I simply plug in the cable. Now, I end up doing this once every 2 to 3 weeks, given how small the island is and how long the charge lasts here in Malta. But even if that, if plugging in the car was a more frequent event, honestly, it wouldn't really make much of a difference. So I do not care how much range the car gives me, right? The average driving length in Malta daily is around just 20 kilometers. Our commutes are longest because we're stuck in traffic, not because we're actually going anywhere, right? So 20 kilometers is the average national amount of kilometers people cover here in Malta, and the car gives 340 kilometers of range. So I've never ever in these nearly 5 years have to worry essentially about how much range the car is going to give me. I will add a footnote to that though. It's very important, even with NCM battery chemistry, that you always plan to charge the car at 20%. So when it reaches 20%, that's when I say, yeah, let me plug it in. Now, even if I forget to plug it in, or I cannot plug it in because someone else is using the charger at home, it's not an issue, because 20% is enough to drive the island literally from one side to the other and back, right? So even if there is an emergency and we need to go to the hospital or something crazy comes up, I'm safe, right? So that's the important rule here. Charge at 20% and you'll be good. One thing I want to also mention is, what do I think Peugeot should do better in this car, right? Because of course there's been a facelift, a minor facelift. They basically changed the front, and the back interior has stayed pretty much the same. There's been slight improvements to the tech, but nothing major. And this is what I'd like to see, I think, in the next iteration of this car from Peugeot. I want to see this car built on an EV-only specific platform. Remember, this was built on an internal combustion platform converted to electric. So that's why maybe that efficiency number I was talking about earlier on is not the best in its class. The fact that they did not sort of plan the build of this car to be electric first, but rather internal combustion first. So I really want to see in the next iteration of this car Peugeot going electric first. It doesn't mean they can't offer an internal combustion model. I'm sure they can, and I know in some markets they're going to have to sell that car for a long time. So yes, why not offer it? But we definitely have to go electric first. Something they have done with the new e-208, the STLA platform. So perhaps it's time we see an e-208 living on an STLA platform. So that's what I'm definitely looking forward to when it comes to development of this vehicle. All right, so that has been my nearly half a decade's worth of experience with the e-208 and going electric. Any regrets? Honestly, none whatsoever. As I said, as long as you have your charging situation figured out, now whether that's going to be very conveniently at home or at work or on the public network, that's going to be up to you. But as long as you have that figured out, I would choose electric over internal combustion literally any day, because the driving experience is just on a whole other level. The convenience of driving the car nearly with just one pedal is something else, and the smoothness and quietness and cleanliness. Just to end on this, the noticeable difference in the air quality in the garage is something that needs to be experienced. I remember the week after we got our first electric vehicle at home and removed one petrol car out of the garage, there was a noticeable difference, and I honestly wasn't expecting it. I know EVs are clean and whatnot, but I wasn't expecting to genuinely feel the difference. It's like we've become accustomed to this pollution in our air, and it's only when it's gone that you realize the damage it was causing. But I'll conclude there. As always, thanks for watching. Leave any questions or thoughts in the comment section down below. But as always, nearly 5 years later, I hope I've convinced you that the future is electric.